Oh crikey. Oh dear me, this is powering away, this fish. Oh, amazing.
Hi and welcome to Advanced Carp Tactics. My name's Martin Ford. You join us here today at the superb linear complex down in Oxford. We spent the last night on St John's, a very busy, productive water. Friend Og of the Wok, and also James Harrison from Advanced Carp Fishing. We each had a bite apiece. But anyway, we've come away now to the quietness of Hunt's Corner. Got my rods out. Just want to talk through a few tactics before we go and see the likes of Jan Porter, Ian Poole, Steve Renyard and Andy Little in action on the various linear complex. Anyway, Jan, as you're probably well aware, was once a matchman, and sometime back in the summer months he came down to Hunt's Corner and he brought with him some very interesting match tactics which he applied to the big carp scene. Before we go and see what Jan did, I just want to show you something that you probably may be aware of, but is a very, very useful tactic down here at Linear, and that's the stick method, which has been around for quite a while now. There are many various different mixes. Myself, I prefer some of the Richworth products, and I just want to show you a couple of bits and pieces that might aid your fishing if you're ever visiting this part of the country. The mix itself is a bit of a combination really. It's the Richworth Lake XL and a favourite additive of mine, which you'll find in a lot of today's modern baits, Robin Red, and that's where the colour comes from. And you can play around with these colour combinations to suit the type of water that you're fishing over. One of the most important factors, however, in any stick mix is the oil. It must have oil content to continuously keep it working and make it attractive to carp that are possibly passing overhead. Now there are many different oils out there. Here's a little ploy that you might want to use. It's just pure salmon oil. You want to try and get as much oil as you possibly can into the dry mix, and you want a mix that when mixed just binds together just enough to hold, like so you can get this into a PVA stick and deliver it out to your swim. The way we do this is purely a case of getting some PVA, and in this case it's the first contact. There's plenty out there and there's plenty of different systems out there, and it's just a case of putting the mix into the tube, pushing the mix through with the aid of some sort of stick or ram like this, pushing the finished stick out and tying it off into the appropriate size tube that you want to deliver. Now this is a favourite tactic of mine on a lot of the linear waters, particularly in the colder months when the fish don't really want piles and piles of bait, and a little tiny hook bait like one of the pellets, or a little tiny piece of, I've got another one made up here actually. There's the hook length. A little tiny small hook, look. One single bait, and what we do is with the aid of a stringer needle, thread the stick onto the needle, pick up the back end of the hook link like this, and just pull the hook length through the stick, out the other side, and then very, very carefully position the hook into the base end of the stick and draw it right in, like so. Now this will actually allow you to use a longer than normal hair because it can't tangle. And particularly at the back end of the season when all the weeds dying off, this is the perfect presentation. You can put this anywhere and know that once the PVA dissolves, you're left with a little tiny pile of feed on the deck with one single hook bait in there. And it sometimes pays to use a bit of colour, like yellow, because it can also be appealing from a taste point of view and a visual point of view. Anyway, let's go back a couple of months when my good friend Jan Porter was here on the banks of Hunt's Corner with his match tactics. But very quickly, before we go there, what's in the wok, Og?
Today we'll be cooking oyster chicken with cabbage and leek stir fry. This should only take about 15 minutes, but it's a very easy meal to make. You get the wok on, place your chicken breasts into the wok, skin side down, and then just let them slowly cook for about 10 or 15 minutes, just depending on how thick your chicken is. And then when that's cooked off, we'll throw in the stir fry, some oyster sauce, serve with noodles, and the job's done.
Well, this is a far cry from my old match days, sat here all in the camo gear, Hunt's Corner, down at Richworth Linear, and I've got to be honest with you, it's a completely different world. This is fishing like I used to do as a kid, fishing through the night, camping out, getting cold, and hoping that you might catch something that will pull the rod back a bit harder than a roach or a skimmer. And not only have the clothing changed in terms of my angling, but also I've had a good long look at baits over the last few years, and since I started pleasure fishing really and trying to catch bigger fish, it's been a crossover between match fishing equipment and match fishing baits. And that old footage on Linear St John's, which was taken a few years back, shows me really in full flight crossing over from a matchman to a specimen onto using things like sticky mag, things like blasting maggots and stuff like that, and catching much smaller carp. Although I have to say, on that day I did hook some pretty big fish that left me all over the place and I couldn't get them in. What do you do? So we've got a bit of a problem here, guys. Things have changed now, a few years down the road, and I've started to look at boilies a lot more seriously now. When I first saw a boilie in a tackle shop, well, my own tackle shop actually in Nottingham, it didn't make any sense to me. You know, it was just a bare hook fished on a hair, and these just round balls, they just look like sweets, and I really didn't think I could catch a fish on them, let alone sell any of them. But Richworth boilies, Tutti Frutti ones, are very famous, and Lee will tell you a lot more about that. He's certainly a lot more knowledgeable about boilies. But the Tutti Frutti boilie of Richworth, the frozen ones, is the boilie that I caught my first ever carp at Naseby Reservoir in 1991. So I sort of cut my teeth on boilie fishing, and though I still wasn't convinced it was going to be the way forward for me. And whilst you can get boilies of all shapes and sizes, I've always stuck to try and use smaller baits, and I don't really get much bigger than a 14mm. The ones I like to use are these midi boilies, which are about 10mm, and generally fish them in pairs, and that always, I think, gives me a bit of an edge. Sometimes when we're match fishing, I'd fish big maggots and then maybe a couple of pinkies on the hook, and it's the same kind of thing. Run the changes, try different colours on the hook as to what you're putting out. I think boilies have sort of revolutionised my approach towards fishing, and what it's enabled me to do is to target bigger fish. In the good old days of maggot bashing, you know, you'd be happy to catch pretty much what you could. Trying to always target the bigger fish, the sort of, what shall we say, the prime fish in the swim. Well, if I'm fishing at night and I'm leaving a bait out, there's always a chance on a boilie that you're going to catch a smaller fish, but generally speaking, in my experience, you tend to catch the bigger fish, and not always on the biggest boilies. I mean, big baits for big fish is the old maxim, and I think there's a lot to be said for that, but there seems to be some reason the carp will bully the way and get in front of the other fish to home in on them. So as far as I'm concerned, the boilie is like a real staple ingredient in terms of my match fishing baits. And to be honest, if I hadn't used boilies, I think there would have been a lot less carp put on the bank. And you know, it's just nice to use a quality bait, thing that you've got confidence in. There's lots of baits around and you have to make your own decision up at the end of the day. As far as I'm aware, I just stick with what I know best and try and keep it simple, because I think that's the key. Now if you're fishing and using boilies, there's lots of times when you can chuck a lot of bait in, big bed of boilies, and you'll catch lots of fish. Certainly around about springtime when they're building up for spawning, and towards the end of summer as they're getting ready for hibernation. And that's fine, and that's great, you know, you can pile them all in. On other occasions it's better to use what we consider match fishing tactics, and that's like a little and often approach, and you'll still probably get through the same amount of bait at the end of the session, but what you're doing is you're actually putting little amounts of bait in, maybe 5 or 6 boilies in on a regular basis, and firing them out in the area where they want to be. And I think that noise will certainly attract fish. And if it attracts seagulls while you're firing them out with a catapult or using a throwing stick, you can bet your bottom dollar that the carp will be intercepting him, and sometimes they'll take them on the drop. I've just fired 5 boilies out there, and right in the middle of that cluster of boilies where they group together, I've just seen a lovely flat spot appear. That tells me that there's something rooting around down on the bottom, and it wouldn't surprise me if that right hand rod doesn't fire off at some stage in the next few minutes. But keep the bait going in, don't put it all in one go, because you can't take it back out again. Keep dripping it and dripping it, and if you're catching it and dripping it, then you know you're on to a winner. And I always think that bait falling through the water will attract fish, and eventually they'll come down on the bottom. And these fish move around the lake all the time. It's not a massive lake. They'll follow the wind, and then they'll see some boilies going through the water, and that might just be the ticket that you need to get them down onto the bottom and get them feeding. And I'm really confident now that I'll get a few bites. So I'm going to do the same on each of the baited swims, just 3 or 4, maybe even half a dozen boilies, and I'll keep doing that once every 15 or 20 minutes. And my old mate the cuckoo's still giving me an audience, so things can't be all that bad. Lovely plopping noise of them boilies hit the water. That'll do. Now just sit and wait. Well, that's a run. I've not put my buzzers on, and you can hear it quite plain as day, even despite the cuckoo. The only time I put my buzzers on these days is when I'm fishing at night. I've got to a situation where I turn them off, and there's nothing finer than listening to the ratchet on the reel on the front drag there. Got nothing against buzzers particularly, I just think if you draw less attention to yourself, then you can sneak a few more out without all the leads coming landing where you're fishing. And that fish is taken after literally 10 minutes of putting 30 or 40 loose feed offerings in that area. You saw me fire the bait out, and this is in real time, so it's just so rewarding when that happens, because you know it's working. I'll catch this fish, cast out again, fire another 10-15 boilies in the same area, and it just seems to be a way of holding the fish, just like a big bed would do. But this way round, you've got more chances of it not backfiring on you. Well, being near Brize Knott, you get a lot of aircraft, and it's just nice to see that old train of EC10 flying over. I used to work on the engines of EC10s when I was an apprentice at Rolls-Royce in Nottingham, so playing a nice lump like this, watching a VC10 is a bit of a privilege really. And I was just going to change that middle rod to a pop-up because I didn't feel like the bottom baits were working. I think they're working in terms of getting fish into the swim, as this is proving, but I don't think they're taking it on the hook. They seem to want the pop-up, and I was just about to switch that onto the old Pineapple Hawaiian, and well, the rest's history, and this roared off, so I've only got one other rod in the water, but It's a nice mirror. It's certainly mid doubles, I would think, at first guess. Always difficult to tell until you know the width of them, but there's some brilliant fish in here, and it's just a fabulous place. I've come here and fished in the winter and struggled, and you know, you come on a day like today, oh, well, you can see the fish. There he is. He's just skulking away under the weeds there. That just came off just at the net. I'm quite happy with that, really. I mean, I would have liked to have had it on the bank and took a picture maybe, but it was a fish. I would reckon 15 or 16 pound. Lovely looking fish, very wide, and it's just come off. It's gin clear water, so it's 1-0 to that carp, but I'll come back and catch him another day. Now that's a sound you don't hear too often. Well, I certainly don't anyway. That's my reel just spinning off there. No buzzers, just nice and quiet, not drawing attention, and we're in. All I've got to do now is just tighten that front drag up a bit. And with a bit of luck, we might get this one in the net. Well, that took about 20-30 yards of line off, and it's such a great feeling, isn't it, picking up. You don't know how big it is. There's a lot of weed out there, but so I don't get into trouble with my other rods. What I normally do now is I'm just going to pop these off the rests and just drop them off the runners. If I get a bite, I'll still know about it because I'll hear the reels going, but that just keeps the line nice and flat, and I can play this fish over the top of there without getting, as they call it, wiped out, which is not a pleasant experience. I've had a couple of rods tangled up in the past, but it's best to try and avoid it. Again, on the pop-up, pop-ups seem to be working a lot more these days than they used to, and I would have to say that I used to be a big bottom bait fan and just nailing it on the deck, but certainly the pop-up's making a big impression on my carp angling at the moment. I think it's cyclical anyway, it comes and goes, but just the presentation of the bait being off the deck by about an inch or so, I think just cons those carp that are a bit riggy, and we've managed to put several carp on the bank, not one on a bottom bait. But of course the bottom bait's going in there as loose feed. Again, another little top up, almost an instant response, and interestingly enough it's always been on the outside rods. I've not had a run on the middle rod, and this is typical. If you can imagine you're fishing a match and you're sat right in the middle of a load of match anglers in the top end peg or the end peg at the bottom, and you've got a lot more chance of fish running towards you, and that's why end pegs are normally better. And if you just see your 3 rods as being pegs, then the end 2 pegs generally are the most productive. Now I'm just applying a nice even pressure to this fish. It's going to be probably a double at worst, but you can never tell sometimes till you've got it right under the rod top. I'll just loosen that drag off a bit there because it's a nice sound, but I'm actually using the drag. I'm not back winding on this at all. Rod's out of the way, so I can just slip this one over the net, and hopefully this one won't come off. You can see that yellow pop-up boilie nicely sticking outside of its top lip. Fish getting towards doubles, I would say. Not caught anything under doubles here. And there you go. The proof of the pudding is in the pop-up. Nicely in the top lip. Tiny hook, just pops out. I'll take my watch off here because I don't like handling fish when I've got watches or bangles on. And nice dumpy fish. And sucker punch on the pop-up. And I'll get that one back in the water and get back to my rods. Well, this is one of my favourite little tricks for catching a few carp, and they're feeding well. I've put about ½ kilo of complex in, that's the frozen ones, and I'm using these Pineapple Hawaiian. They're really visible pop-ups, and I'll put 3 of those on a stringer, little cluster of bait out there, and what I'm trying to do is to draw the fish really close to that hook, and this seems to work for me. A real nice polarisation of having this orangey red complex boilies and then just one pop-up target boilie in the middle. It's a trick that worked in match fishing, and it works very, very well for me in carp fishing. So I'll just whack this one out on the spot. And I've got a bit of local information on this swim. About a third of the way across, it's a weed bed. It's all gravel. It's probably 6 to 8 foot deep, not quite sure. I've not used a marker float. And just in the actual reflection of the trees when it goes flat calm, I'm just casting into there, and it's right on the edge of the weed itself, and the fish are moving in and out of the weed, popping out onto this sort of gravel. So if I can get this on the target, then I should expect to get a run. Well, take two. I cast it a little bit too far that first time. I felt the elastic going through the rings, but I just let it go that bit too far, and really important to get it just on the edge of that weed. I could leave it in the weed, there's a chance of a bite, but I've had all my bites just this side of the weed, and so I'm not going to take any chances. I've got a nice marker. That should be better. I've got a nice marker on the far bank. There's a row of trees, and that's important at night time, so I can see the silhouettes against the skyline. And then I've got another marker, so I've got distance and I've also got accuracy. I'm just looking where that elastic's come to my tip now, and it's just about right. Anything from the tip ring to about a metre away from it will do me fine. I'm not the only one who's cuckoo around here. Listen to my little friend in the woods. Well, I like to keep things simple. I suppose it fits my character really, but this is a single pop-up. It's a pineapple Hawaiian, and I've got a little tiny rubber stop. You can actually tie a knot in the loop and use that, but I just like that stop. Not only does it plug the water up a little bit, I think, but just neatens it off a bit and stops that boilie wrapping round onto the hook itself. Smallish hook, I think that's important. That again comes from the match angling repertoire. Small hooks tend to be better, not in terms of just getting bites, but also in terms of bait presentation and in terms of hook holding. I think it's very important to understand sometimes that very, very big fish can be caught on very small hooks, and I think a size 10 hook is a small hook for a 20-pound carp personally. And when I say small, I mean small as in it's a good size. I've got a non-toxic shot there about an inch away from the hook, and that's going to anchor down the actual pop-up, so that'll pop up like so, just anchored down. I'm using a coated braid, and actually using the shot itself to make a little link in there so it's flexible, and then quite a short hook length, probably 8 inches long. And this is the bit where a lot of people spend a lot of time and energy, and it's a very, very simple rig. A lad at Wigan Way showed it me a long time ago, and it's simply a lead tail that fits over the top of the swivel, about a size 7 swivel, and I use one of the Richworth marker leads, which has got an oversized swivel on the top of it, and that neatly threads on top of the rubber tail and fits quite snugly. And the nice thing about that is it's a safety rig, so it's sort of a semi-fixed rig, if you like. So you get the bolt effect, and obviously if it gets snagged up, if I'm unfortunate enough to encounter a snag with the lead or get cracked off, then that can just simply pull away. It'll either pull away on the lead tail or it'll pull away on the actual lead itself. So we've got double the chance of safety, and that's really important for any type of fishing. And that's it, and that's pretty much what I use for most of my carp fishing. I don't get bogged down with fandangled rigs. There's a couple of variations I use from time to time. I use mono, sometimes I use the withy kind of rig that Steve invented, but that's pretty much it. And one thing about leads, I tend to use fairly heavy leads, anything up to 5 ounces depending on the distance I'm fishing, but generally speaking I'll fish around about 3 to 4 ounces. There are occasions where I'll fish smaller leads, and I've caught plenty of fish, but I've had occasions too where fish have picked the bait up and run against the lead and actually been running it, but the lead's not been heavy enough to set the hook. So that's it. Then on to simply 12-pound main line, 3-pound test curve rod, big pit reel, and we're ready to go. Now this rod, I've put some bait in a similar kind of area. It's got weed to the extrema where I'm casting, where I've marked up with the pole elastic, and this side again it drops off onto very hard gravel, but I've kept it away from these two rods. I've got these two rods, the right and the middle rod, quite tight in terms of the baited area. This one's set aside probably around about 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, and that just keeps it away and allows fish to sort of move in and out of the swim. So it's just a gentle cast, about a third of the way across. Feel the elastic go through, just check it, and that should, with a bit of luck, be on gravel, which it is, which is nice. Just set the bobbins up. Oh, well, this is my bivvy table, and I've got a selection of baits here. I just want to quickly talk you through what I've been using today and why I've been using them. First up, I've got the midi boilies. These are ones that I favour a lot from hard pressured waters where they're using big baits. They're shelf life, and just have to be a little bit careful when you're putting them on the hair. I try to use sometimes a little spigot of a hook length, or maybe even a little piece of wire, just to keep those on the hair as opposed to trying to burst them, because they're quite small. They're the shelf life ones, and I catch loads of fish on them. I'm happy with them. Very, very popular again is the frozen baits, and as I said, when I had my tackle shop in the 80s, frozen baits were the first and foremost to come onto the scene, and they went through a period where shelf lives became very popular. People didn't have to use fridges in the shops, etc. And that's gone full circle, and now people are wanting to use ready-mades that are frozen. I like frozen ones. I catch plenty on both, to be honest with you, but these tend to be a little bit on the softer side, so I like these as a food source for loose feed, etc. And then of course we've got the slightly bigger ones again. These are available in shelf life or in frozen. These are shelf life ones, and I just wanted to show you there how that yellow pineapple Hawaiian pop-up sticks out and sets itself apart from all those other ones, and that's the reason why I think it's so effective. The pop-ups in question, I mentioned those. Really pungent aroma. It's sort of like it's a honey sort of pineapple smell, and known for the pop-ups, brilliant pop-ups. They'll stay on forever and a day really. Very, very buoyant, good consistency. And we've got these here, which are again shelf life, 14mm complex, and I've air dried them. They've been out of the bag for best part of a year, and they've gone rock hard. And I know if I'm fishing a long session and I want to use a boilie and be confident it's going to be on the hook after leaving it in the water for say 8 to 10 hours, then they're the ones I'll use. And finally, the Richworth boilie mix, the one for making pop-ups, is particularly legendary. Lots of people use it. It's a sort of industry standard, I suppose. And these are all boilies, pop-up boilies that have been made up by various people, and I've cadged them. We've got little tiny ones that Ian Russell makes up, and we've got fluorescent pink ones and white ones, and they, again, red ones and orange ones, and just different colours. And if you ring the changer, say you're fishing pop-ups and they're not taking bottom baits, maybe as well to fish 2 on a yellow, 1 on a red, or whatever, until you find out the pop-up that's the most effective. Don't get carried away with it. Basic colours work. Your tooties, stick with them. Lovely orange colour, and you'll catch plenty of fish on them. But try using a different colour boilie, just like I used to do when I was fishing bronze maggots, and have a few red maggots as target bait on the hook. It just seems to work. I don't know why, but it just seems to work. And that's pretty much it. And if you stick to those guidelines, don't get too carried away, feed little and often, keep the bait going in all the time, then I'm sure you'll end up with a very productive day's fishing. And in terms of catching carp, I've got 100% confident in this bait. I've used it now for the best part of 12 years, caught tons of carp on it, and I've got no reason to change. And with this new complex bait, I think there's going to be a lot more carp on the bank. Well, this has been a fantastic session for me. 8 fish on the bank and culminating in a mid-20 just as the light was starting to fade last night. I've had some better sessions, but I don't think I've had as many enjoyable ones as this, and all taken on a bait that 10 years ago probably I would have poo-pooed and certainly not given it a second glance, but it's a firm favourite now, and I wouldn't go anywhere for any type of fishing, not just carp fishing, without taking a few boilies along with me. So good luck and great fishing.
That's proper, that, isn't it? I don't expect to get my boilie back, but look at that. Ooh. Come on. Well, it don't get much better than that on a tiny trim back Richworth yellow popple. Absolutely fantastic. Yeah, beauty.
Well, it just goes to prove that a matchman's tactics, in Jans Porter's case, do pay well on some of these big carp waters. It's not necessarily all about putting loads of bait in, but as Jans proved, like, you know, methods, tactics, think about what you're doing. Incidentally, I can smell in the distance a bit of the old wok. How's it going there, Og?
Yeah, it's all cooking up good, mate. Chicken's nearly done. Over 5 minutes and we'll be rumbling, I think.
Okay. While Og's cooking away there and preparing our lunch, here's a little tactic I used last night on St John's water. It's a prolific water, it's got a fantastic head of fish, but sometimes it can be a little bit difficult to tempt a bite. It does get visited by an awful lot of anglers using very different methods. One of the methods that I do like to use down there is just what I call a one-hit flavour hit, and that's basically using tutti frutti boilies, which smell absolutely gorgeous, like, and they attract fish from miles around. Put them into a little Culinaire food chopper. Using the chopper system, just chop them up into a fine crumb, which we have here, and then just insert the fine crumb back into our old friend, the PVA stick. And in this case, or in last night's case, the hook bait was one single 10mm boilie, but it just shows how effective it can be. And whilst we're on the subject of flavours, Andy Little, who needs no introduction, a very well-known carp angler, spent a little bit of time on the New Day Ticket Water Brasenose earlier this year and put to use the Richworth capsules and flavours to catch some fantastic carp. Let's go across and see how we got on.
As carp anglers, most of us are aware just how powerful liquid attractors are. Already we're using them, you know, within our boilies. We always use a lot of very sophisticated flavours, especially made for sort of the boilie industry, and over a period of time, you know, things like Tutti Frutti and Scopex and that have been absolute killers. You know, caught so many fish, but how many of us use them to their full benefit? Probably very few in respects, because although we use boilie dips and we'll stick our pop-up in there or stick our bottom bait in there and chuck them out, and you get this sort of slow leak off and the carp find them attractive, I'm sure if we could actually inject a liquid straight into the water, the carp would home on it very quickly. Because, you know, if you read all the books, and I read a lot of koi books, and in that industry they're talking about a tiny amount of liquid flavour in thousands of gallons of water, and the carp can home in on it. If we could recreate that, I think that we could actually catch an awful lot more fish in difficult circumstances. You know, we're always going to get this scenario where, you know, the carp aren't really feeding to their full expectations, and we can't put a lot of bait out there. We want to put the bare minimum bait, and stringers and PVA bags, they're all very well, but you're still feeding the carp. If we could fish just a hook bait only with some liquid attractor around it, I'm sure that there are circumstances that we could catch more fish. You know, winter is the classic example, when they're not really on the feed, don't want to put a stack of bait in there. Single hook baits are great, let's put some liquid attractor around it. So how are we going to do it? Before we get to actually the how we're going to do it, what we're going to use, because what you've got to be very careful of with liquids is that it's the situation where more isn't necessarily the best. Boilie dips are already sort of diluted to an acceptable level. You can't over flavour the swim. But if you use a straight high concentrated boilie flavour, then you can actually be doing yourself a great disservice, because some of these are like 500 to 1 strength. Put a drop of that in the water and you'll get a massive explosion of flavour in the area. The carp are home in on it, but they never find your bait because the flavour area is too strong. So it almost becomes a bit of a repellent. So we've got to get the levels right. So when we're looking at liquid attractors to put straight into the water, I would honestly go for something like a ready-made boilie dip, or dilute your own flavours. One of the very best ways of getting a liquid into the water is actually one of these attractor capsules. Basically what they are, they're little dissolving capsules that you can inject flavour into, and cleverly you can put them in the side of a lead. What you've got there, these are the capsules, you've got a little rubber ring, you can drop them in either side of the lead like that, and then with a syringe, and be careful with these, don't want anyone sort of injuring themselves, a little bit of flavour, and inject that into the capsule, and what you get this beautiful leak off of flavour into the water right next to your bait. So we'll just do that side, and drop that side. That's away. And to get an instant release, what I also do is I just take the needle and I prick the capsule 2 or 3 times, and what that will do, that will allow the flavour to immediately come out, and then as the capsule dissolves, you get the full amount of the flavour coming out. So quite a good little trick that. Now when it comes to flavours, what you've got to remember is that some flavours are very buoyant and other flavours are very heavy, so some settle on the bottom and some will rise to the surface. Now we can use this to our benefit. If you start to think about the sort of bottom that you're fishing over, you know, it may be gravel with very little in the way of weed, very little in the way of any obstructions or anything, and this way you want something that's quite heavy. You want sort of glycerol type flavour, that when it dissolves out the capsule it stays on the bottom, and you'll probably be fishing a bottom bait close to that, so you've got the one hook bait amongst this lovely flavour. But if you're fishing somewhere that's very, very weedy, that's going to be difficult, because if you're casting into the weed you might be able to have to put some PVA around the hook to stop it masking up in the weed. What you don't really want the flavour dispersing out into the bottom. What you want to try and do is get that flavour coming up through the weed, and you can do this by using an oil-based flavour, and in fact if you're very clever, do a mixture of both. What I like to do sometimes is put some heavy flavour, some sort of glycerol based flavour in the capsule, and then top it up with a bit of oil based flavour. So what you get when you cast in, you'll get flavour rising through the weed, which hopefully as a carp are sort of coming through lily pad beds and beds of Canadian pondweed, they'll pick up on that, they'll follow that flavour trail down, there'll be more flavour around the bottom, and lo and behold, your bait right in the middle of it. I suppose it's all very well me waffling on about these flavours and finding ones that are buoyant and finding other ones that sink. How do you go about telling exactly what floats and what sinks? The easiest way is just get yourself a little test tube, a jar, a little aquarium, anything that you can see clear water into, and just test out your flavours. A couple of drops in there and see what happens to them. You can put them in the capsules. All I would do is inject it into the capsules, drop the lead into the bottom of the tank, and watch what happens. You'll see that the glycerol type flavours, they start to disperse and they hug the bottom, and they sort of move out almost in a radius away from the ledger weight, and then you get the oil type ones, they come off in little bubbles and they come to the surface. You can mix and match them then, and then you can find which ones are going to be the best on a day. If you're fishing in weed, you may want to do a 50-50, some that float, some that sink. You may even want to fish a pop-up straight up off the lead and fish it amongst a stream of oils that are coming up. Very successful method that. So just experiment, but just watch the strength of the flavours. Don't overcook it. These capsule leads come in all sorts of shapes and sizes. You know, got inline jobs and free running ones. So, you know, you're not restricted on your sort of rig permutations, which is quite nice. Now, the capsules really do come into their own, you know, getting this flavour into the water when you're just fishing single baits. And this is more likely to occur in the winter when it's tough, or if you're fishing at very, very long range. You know, most people, there's some good casters around these days and they can whack a lead sort of 130 yards. Try doing that with a stringer or a PVA bag. That cuts your casting down a lot. But put one of these out there and you can put a lot of flavour around a bait at range, which is good. Now, going away from the sort of liquid theme, there's other ways of creating this flavour trail, this, you know, inducing a carp to come near your hook bait without loads of freebies around there, and you can do it with these. I think these are a genius. These are these little they call them rig inducing tablets, which is you're putting a flavour into the water. They're a bit like the old refreshers. Remember the refreshers that sort of, you know, they sort of melt on your tongue? These are absolutely brilliant, and in actual fact they taste quite good as well. Very, very good. I like these. Now, I've got a couple of tricky rigs to use these with, which I'll show you. How about this for something a bit different? This is my fizzy burger rig. What I've done, I've actually put one of these tablets in between a boilie. Cut a boilie in half, put it on the hair, and drop this tablet in the middle. Now that tablet will go out in the water, and as soon as it comes into contact with water, it will start fizzing away. And hang on a minute, we need to go and have a look at this. Now that was on the, oh dear me, this is powering away this fish. Oh, amazing. That was on the good old capsules with a bit of flavour in there, and a bottom bait just cast out on its own. So there we go, the method actually works. Oh, that was brilliant. Probably been out there about 20 minutes or so, I guess. No freebies round it, just the hook bait. I put a this was actually a fish flavoured or a fish meal type boilie, just a bottom bait on a very, very straightforward rig, running lead and a fluorocarbon hook link, and I injected a bit of flavour in both capsules, but I've done exactly what I was telling you about earlier. I put some oily type flavour in one capsule because there's a lot of weed out here, and what I hoped to do was to sort of, as the carp were passing over the swim, I hoped to draw them in initially with the oily flavour, and then once they'd sort of homed in on that, they'd drop down onto the glycerol type flavour, which was in the other capsule and was dispersing all around the hook bait, and it worked a treat. It's a good old method, this, especially for people that go out and do short sessions. All these sort of capsules and inducing tablets and PVA bags and stringers, they're all great for day sessions where you're not waiting for a whole rake of carp to come into the swim. You're fishing for a fish at a time, and if you can do that 3 or 4 times in the same day, you've had a good old session. This is lovely. Did that ever scream off? That's really pleased me, this. And you can see the simplicity of the rig there, just a running lead, quite a longish hook link, because as I say, there's quite a bit of weed there, and all I wanted to do was just to get the bait to have a bit of a soft touch down over the weed, and the old capsule full of flavour did the job. That is really nice. Beautiful looking fish, real short, dumpy, fast growing jobs these. That is immaculate. I love these sort of waters where you can sort of experiment with different setups, and you know, where you've got a few fish cruising around. Here we go, and you go, you know, you can try these things out. That's belter, lovely double, super stuff. Well, that certainly worked very, very well. And in tricky conditions where fish really aren't going mad at the moment, they haven't got their heads down feeding particularly well. There's one dumpy fish. They work brilliantly, nicely hooked. And there we go, you can see there's the lead. In actual fact the capsule's dissolved, it's gone, it's done its job. Longish hook link, just sat down on the top of the weed, that flavour dispersed round, and that carp homed in on it. Beautiful. What a lovely looking fish. Let's have a quick look at it before we get him back. I won't weigh him, but he's definitely a double. Chunky fish. That's got some weight to it. It's very, very nice. Perhaps as much as a mid-double, that. Lovely. There we go. Well, actually, I think that's my other buzzer, so I'm going to get this back in the water, and I think my other rig's off, so I'm going to go and attend to that. Well, it's all gone off at the moment. It's gone absolutely manic. The flavour obviously worked. They like this. Quite a successful method. I reckon there was a little pod of fish came through and probably picked up on the scent of that flavour. This one's on the capsule again. Very similar rig to before. I wanted to get my fizzy burger out there, see if they like that. But this was on the capsule, on the fish meal boilie. It's a great little session. Wonderful fishing. You can get this sort of action in the middle of the winter, you know, on a real hard day, just by being very selective about the way you fish. Because the big problem is with putting loads of boilies or particles or anything out, once you put them out there, you can't get them back out again, and if you've overcooked the swim and they're not feeding, it can be a real problem. Beautiful. These fish definitely read the script, there's no doubt about that at all. Perfect. Lovely. Look at that. This is what carp fishing's about. Don't like all that sitting around. When you can get action like this, it's great. It's just rolled on the line. That's it, it's coming down again. A cracking looking fish. Beautiful. And capsule's completely melted on that one as well. So there you go. That's lovely. Right, that was brilliant. And another little dumpy double. Lovely, lovely fish. Look at that. That's real classic lines of a fast growing fish. A few more scales on that one. Beautiful. Cheers, my dears. You did me very nicely. So there we go. There you go. Wonderful. Right, this is me little fizzy burger. I've got a couple of halves of a boilie there. The tablet in between. And just shove it on the hair rig. And just drop a little boilie prop in the hole. And that is virtually ready to go. All I'm going to do now is put a rig stop behind that and then put my hair on knotless knot style, and you can do that with a bottom bait or a pop-up. Right, just push that stop right up against the bottom boilie, bottom half of the boilie, and that stops it all coming apart, especially true with pop-ups, because that's going to be sitting up there, and the last thing you want is this all parting and masking the hook. So a neat little rig. The most important thing is putting that little rig stop on the hair to stop everything falling down, and as you cast out, this will fizz away in the water, sending off loads of flavour and pull the fish around it. And you can use a bottom bait, you can use a pop-up, there's all sorts of permutations with that. And another little tricky adaptation that I've done, these tablets, they've all got a hole in the centre, so easy to put on the hair, but also I've made up a little ring on the side of my lead. I don't think you can see that. It's a large-eyed swivel, and I've drilled into the side of the lead, super glued that ring in there, and it makes a great anchor point for things like this. It's like PVA bags and stringers. Anything that you're going to attach, it's so simple. How quick's that? And you can do the same with your PVA bags, your stringers. It's just a simple method of attaching anything, and it goes out with the lead, sits on the bottom, doesn't get tangled up with the main part of the rig. And as we all know, as this sort of descends through the water, you'll end up with your hook bait right next to those fizzy tablets, all that lovely flavour coming off, and the carp should home in on it. So it's another great sort of winter method, long range method, or when things are tough. I'm going to put this one out, see if we can get a fish on me fizzy burger. That's all settled. Sit back and wait. Oh, here we go. Excellent. Oh, now that's a belter. That's been good old fizzy burger. Excellent. Well, that didn't take a great amount of time. Whew. That was one heck of a take. Did that ever go off? Oh, it's on a mission, this one. The margins. Oh, knit one, pull two. Here we go. Lovely stuff. Police, that one went off. It's funny how you have favourite little rigs, and my strange sense of humour, I suppose, but that one appeals to me. The good old fizzy burger. I can just imagine that sort of festering away on the bottom, all the little bubbles and particles coming off of that tablet, and the old carp sort of their barbels pricking up and homing in on it. Excellent stuff. The only downside you get sometimes is with that ring in the side of the lead and a couple of tablets on there, I've actually had fish pick up the lead trying to eat the tablets, so just be aware of that. Make sure it's a proper take. It is a double. You can see the tablets still on the lead. They haven't completely dissolved. I don't know what's left of the bait. Just get me left. Lovely. Lovely scalings on it. Real old umpty back jobs in here, and fast growers. You can probably see the tablets actually completely melted on the bait, more or less gone on the lead. Worked a treat. Chunky fish. There, look, you can see virtually nothing left of that tablet, more or less dissolved. Now that's been out there, I guess, 25 minutes, half an hour, so it gives you an idea of the dissolve rate. And there was a couple of tablets on there. The one on the hook bait, cool, that wanted that, has completely melted, although probably the last bit got washed away. The great thing is, as you can probably see from that, although the tablet's gone, the boilies, whoops, keep still. The boilies come together, and you've still got a very presentable rig once that flavour's all dispersed out in the water and attracted the carp into it. So it's good for quite a few hours. Under normal circumstances, I'd probably recast every hour or so if I wasn't getting any takes, just to make sure you're putting fresh flavour in all the time. But yeah, great. Another stunning fish. What a chunky little fish. That's great. Well, I've really enjoyed this session. 3 beautiful fish, all doubles, one probably best part of £16 or so, and all taken on single hook baits on rigs that really a lot of people don't use these days. And once you come into the sort of winter and when it gets harder, any time that you think that you don't want to put a rake of bait out there or very short sessions, give it a go, because both the liquids and the fizzy tablets, magic.
Well, didn't Andy do well? And it just shows you what a bit of thought and flavour can do for your carp fishing. Talking of flavour, I can still smell that very nice meal that Og's cooking over there, which I'm going to have in a second. But before we do that, I want to take you to one of the other, or 3 other waters actually, part of the linear complex, which is the Guy Syndicate Lakes. The Guy Syndicate Lakes are made up of 3 waters: Gaunts, Unity and Yeomans. And we're going to pop across to Unity in a second and join Ian Poole. But before we go there, just another little thought about flavours and additives. You saw how successful Andy's method was. Do you put some thought into your own fishing when it comes to, say, using pellets, which our next angler, Ian Poole, is renowned for? In my own fishing with pellets over the years, I've certainly learnt a few little tactical tips that have helped me put more carp on the bank. And one of those, which is quite simple, is to mix the sizes. Carp can get very preoccupied on one size of pellet. If you mix the sizes up, to a degree, it just confuses them. Something else that you might want to try, as Andy proved, the use of a flavour or a soak on a bait can just make it stand out that little bit more than what you're putting down as feed, and perhaps draw the attention of carp to it. Another little dodge you might like to try is to actually soak some hook bait pellets. I mean, if you're fishing small pellets or mixed pellets, why not put a larger pellet over the top as the hook bait? Yeah, as Andy proved in his piece, flavours, they all add to the attraction of a bait, etc., and it's well worth a try, particularly when nothing else is happening around the lake. Just be that little bit different and you never know. Anyway, that's enough from me. Let's go across to Unity Lake on the Guys Complex, where Ian Poole, who is a master at pellet fishing, shows you some of his tricks and tactics.
I've come down for a 24-hour session on the Unity Lake on the Guys Syndicate Complex at Linear. There's 3 lakes down here, Yeomans, Unity and Gaunts. I think Unity is considered the runs water of the 3. Got a lot of fish in here, probably it's most famous for the head of ghost carp. Managed to catch one last night, the 24. I'm going to show you how I caught it. I've had all my runs on a really sort of standard PVA bag setup. For those of you who don't know, basically a PVA bag just dissolves in water. It means you can put bait in it, cast it out. Once it's out on the bottom, it will dissolve and it leaves your hook bait surrounded with a patch of bait. I mean, there's no better presentation really. It just you can cast it into weed, into silt, and you know you've got a perfect presentation every time. I use a really simple setup. Just 18 inches of tubing, a little flat inline lead, hook bait in this case is a couple of little multiplex cylinders. This is an excellent sort of hook bait for where there's been a lot of pressure. I mean, you know, we all know how much pressure some of the waters get these days, and if they've seen a lot of PVA bags they can get a bit funny, but fishing a hook bait like this is different from a normal round boiling. It can really get you a lot of extra takes. It's dead easy how I set it up in the bag. I mean, the PVA bag mix is just some halibut pellets, some 2mm trout pellets, and some crushed up and whole 10mm multiplex boilies, just the frozen variety. It's just a bit different really than just fishing just a bag with say one size pellet in, where say the carp that have had a lot of pressure, have seen it all before, you know, are going to think, hang on, we've been caught on this, you know, we're not going to feed on it. But just breaking it up, putting 2 or 3 different ingredients in, sort of definitely gets you more takes. I mean, the way I set my bag up is just a little bit of bait in the bottom, and then with the hook bait, just put it down into the bottom corner. And what I do is just put the hook through and bring the point out of the bag in the corner, like that. The next stage is really just to fill the bag up, sort of keep the lead in the fingers on my other hand. Then the hook link, just as long as it's not straight, then it's okay. Doesn't have to be perfect, the hook link can go through anyway really. Then just knock it down to keep everything nice and tight in the bag. And then I just push the lead into the top of the bait. And at this stage you don't want the contents too tight in the bag, else you won't be able to tighten the bag up at the end. Just really just push it down, twist the top, and I'll just tie it off with a bit of PVA tape rather than PVA string. It just dissolves easier than normal string. And just tie it off with just 2 overhand knots, that's all you need, it won't come undone. Just cut off any loose bits. Just cut off the loose around the top. Say, just doesn't really matter if you're sort of fishing out 20-30 yards, but the further out you need to fish, the more little bits like this will make a difference, and it'll keep your accuracy really good. The last stage is to just make sure the bag's nice and tight, and then you can use the corners to really get the contents nice and tight. This will help your bag sink better when you cast it out. They say the quicker it sinks, the less likely that it's going to break up on the way down rather than on the bottom. So just use a bit of spit just to stick the corners down. And then we just puncture a couple of holes in it just to let any remaining air in, and then just use my hands really just to make sure it's nice and compact and firm. So really the further out you're fishing, the sort of the more aerodynamic you need to get it just to keep the accuracy. But that's basically it. That's the setup I've been catching on since yesterday. And that's ready to go. So I could just drop that in the margins or fish it about 70-80 yards, no problem. Just remember with PVA bagging is that to make sure you get your rig completely dry before you get it anywhere near your PVA. I mean, one drop of water is going to make the bag break. So dry it off in a towel, drop it in some base mix, just do whatever you think really to get it dry. Yeah, rather than mix up a huge bucket of PVA bag mix and then possibly waste half of it at the end of a session, I like to mix up a little bit little and often, just to keep it as fresh as possible. I'll often leave the crumbing of the boilies to the very last minute before I'm going to make the bag up. I mean, these the multiplex freezer baits sort of crumb down really nicely, and I find they're superb in bag mixes. But the key is to put them in at the last minute so they don't start drying up. Just tied up a couple of new rigs, and I've just set up a couple of typical PVA bag situations. The first one, we've got one size of pellet and a bright boilie. I mean, this is what people traditionally associate with a PVA bag setup. You know, nice and simple, and over the years it's caught a lot of fish. But on waters where you've seen a bit of pressure, this is going to stop working eventually. I mean, it's quite easy for the carp to think, there's a hook bait, let's just eat everything around it and leave that on its own. It does happen. I've seen it countless times in the margins where the hook bait gets sussed straight away, and believe me when I say carp are capable of clearing every bit of that pellet and not even touching that hook bait. They are on a lot of waters. If you compare that with this one, this is what I'm fishing on Unity today. It's dead simple to do. It's just taking the PVA bag setup one step further. Same rig, the hook bait, just instead of a round boilie, just a couple of little cylinder shaped boilies. And in the mix we've just got crushed boilies, two sizes of pellet. I mean, but if you compare the two, it's not hard to see which the carp is going to suss out quicker. I mean, on that one, the hook bait could be anywhere on that one. It could be that boilie, it could be a bit of pellet, it could be that. So you're giving the carp a lot more to think about on that one, and they're going to get caught on that more than on that setup, especially on waters that have seen a little bit of pressure. Not everywhere, you know, this setup will still catch, but I find, especially, you know, at this time of year when we're heading into the autumn, 9 times out of 10 this setup will score better than that one. Yeah, both setups are going to catch, but it's worth ringing the changes. You know, it can be on a daily basis which one's going to work better. One of the things I think is really important when fishing bags is to keep your hook length nice and short. I mean, my starting point is around about 5 inches, and I'll show you exactly why. If you think about how that sits on the bottom, a carp comes in to feed. It's not exactly got to go very far to eat all that pellet. It's not going to move far. It's going to keep grubbing around on this little area, and the hook length too long is going to give it too much room for manoeuvre when the carp sucks in your hook bait. So what I'm looking to achieve is when the carp sucks in the bait, the hook link is going to straighten in its mouth, and what normally happens is it will sort of jolt back, and that's a point when a carp will know that there's something wrong. But say you had a hook link twice that long and it sucks it in, the carp is going to think, there's something in there, but you're not getting the advantage of the hook link pulling straight and then just slightly jolting back, and it can get rid of it a lot easier. I mean, as I said, 5 inches is my starting point, but on a few waters that are really pressured, I've gone down to as little as 3 inches. And I know it seems short, but believe me, it is long enough to still catch fish and hook them properly. It takes a bit of sort of a leap of faith to fish them that short, but on certain waters it really does work. And if you're fishing like this and you think, I should have caught a fish but perhaps it hasn't gone, and you've had a few liners and you've got fish rolling over your bait, one of the first things I would do is to shorten the link down and see if the carp are getting away with it. And you often find that, say, just taking 2 inches off will do the trick. Yeah, with a setup like this I found that going shorter first is definitely better than going longer. We got down to Unity yesterday afternoon, had a quick little round, spoke to a few of the locals. They put us onto a few hot spots out in the middle, but funnily enough it's been the margins that have produced all the fish. I mean, I took advice of the locals and put 2 rods out in the middle last night, and I decided to put the third one down the margins where I knew a couple of fish had been caught before. And I must admit, I thought that as it got dark, there was a few fish showing out in open water. The spot I was fishing out there was just behind a big bed of Canadian pondweed, where it shallows up onto a slight plateau. That was a spot I thought was going to produce. And the third rod went down the edge, really, again onto a little silty spot, just a bag and a few spods of hemp over it. And say it was only out there an hour before I had a tench. And then it's just been steady, really, carp every few hours. So it wasn't the rod I expected to go, but it shows you can never tell where the carp are going to be. And even local knowledge sort of isn't enough at times. Been a wet night, it's rained all night, but the fish are feeding. Just picked up my fourth fish now, picking them up from just down the margins. Action started at just after dark last night. We caught a tench first, and a carp, and another one, and it went quiet. So just picked up this one in the rain again. I've had this one on a good 5 minutes now. From the fight I've got a feeling it's one of the ghosties, maybe wrong, but they do fight hard. So I've had two so far and they took a long time to get in. Just picking all the fish up on cylinder shaped bottom baits, just a multiplex. Seems to be the winning bait at the moment. Oh, it's not a ghostie. A Unity Lake carp, not a massive one, but I know Linear put a load of fish in last year of this sort of size to grow on. They've already put a lot of weight on. I think they're going to be some big fish in another couple of years' time. Probably give it 2 years, I think that's going to be 20 plus, to be honest. It's about 12-13 pound now. A nice little carp. There we go, another ghost, well, sort of a ghostie. Cracking fish. What a lot of people come down to Guys for, these fish in this lake, they're quite famous for it. Some of the other ones are sort of now approaching £30. This is, to be honest, this is one of the smaller ones. But a cracker, just under 20.
Well, they certainly were superb ghost carp that Ian caught, and the lake is actually quite renowned for them. The whole complex, in fact, or the Guys Lake Syndicate as a whole, it's a very, very good water, and it's well known for producing fish to 40 pounds. There's another little method that you might want to look at concerning pellet, and that's the use of a product called Sticko. Once rolled and formed, the pellet goes off hard, and these can be catapulted a real distance, and this is another little edge that you might want to employ in your own carp fishing. James Harrison, who works alongside myself on advanced carp fishing, has been messing around with Sticko, so let's cross to James and have a look and see what he does. As you can see from the bits and pieces that James got here, he's using the Sticko powder along with some very small halibut pellet and a handful of gravel. The gravel, incidentally, is to add weight to the finished ball to enable it to travel further. A nice little tactical tip, and something he's been keeping quiet for quite a while now. It's purely a case of taking the pellet, putting the required amount into a bowl and giving them a good dousing with a Sticko powder. One important factor here is that you must work this product with wet hands. You'll notice that James has an atomizer which is filled with lake water. Once the pellets have been covered completely in the white powder, James then adds a little bit more water and also adds some water to his hands to enable him to work the product without it sticking to his skin. As this powder soaks into the pellet or binds the pellet, James is able to form small balls or large balls of pellet which, if left for a short period, will go absolutely rock hard and can be catapulted a fair old distance. Well, as you can see, James's method is something that you might want to consider, and it's a very tactical approach when you need to get bait out at range. Myself though, I tend to do an awful lot of bit fishing. Little tiny baits like this are my game. However, we're going to cross now to Hardwick Lake to visit an exceptional angler, Steve Renyard. Guy's been around for quite a while now, and it was actually his first visit to the water. Now, I've known Steve for quite a while, and Steve's game is bait application. He likes to put the boilie in.
Hello everybody, here we are on Hardwick Lake, a very windy and cold day. You'll have to excuse the sound quality maybe, I don't know whether it's going to sound too bad or not. Come down for a few days filming. I've been a Richworth consultant for I think about 4 years now. Been very successful, had a very successful time with their baits. I'm like most of you are probably watching this video, a weekend angler. I've got a full-time job and a family, you know, my time is basically at the weekend, so you know, when I went to Richworth I knew that their baits were quality. It just took out all the rolling element for me, you know, during the week, so I could just pick up my gear and go on a Friday and, you know, sort of come back on a Sunday and didn't have to worry about all the hassle of that. You know, basically I use probably just 2 of their baits. I use the complex and the multiplex. Been very successful with the multiplex. The complex is a new one. It's a fish meal bait with a crab flavour, robin red, which is an all-time great. Quite a few of Richworth's little secrets which they don't like telling anyone about, but it makes the bait very good. They do it in a variety of sizes, 14mm, 18mm, 10mm. They do dumbbells and paste. These were the baits I chose for Hardwick. You know, I knew that probably quite a lot of this bait's gone in already because it's a Richworth linear fishery. A lot of you guys are probably, you know, already buying the bait and bunging it in the lake already, so I thought, well, I might as well use those too and give it a go. Come down for a 3-night session. The first night I was here, I fished in the Smith's half, quite deep, you know. It was quite still and warm then, and the fish was cruising about, so I decided to stick in the margins. So I put on my pair of waders and had a little feel about in the margins. I fished very close, you know, under the rod tips and down to the right hand side of my margin. Within about 3 hours I had a run, and unfortunately the hook pulled. And I think when the wind changed, the fish sort of moved out, so we decided to come on what it's called the Spit, I believe. It's a part of the lake that splits Smiths and Hardwick in two. I'm not actually fishing on the Spit. What I've decided to do is fish halfway along over to the far margin where the wind was pushing into, onto the conveyor bank part. They call it the conveyor part. It's where they used to convey all the gravel to take it off for cleaning and desilting and whatever. I don't think they use it for that now, but as you can see from the film, you'll see where I mean. Basically I had 3 areas. I was fishing, I put all 3 on the far margin primarily because you know, we're fishing in the summer and there's quite deep holes in Hardwick. It's quite a deep lake and I didn't want to be fishing too deep, so I decided to fish the margins. On the first night I caught a 19.5 linear, which was one of the old original stock, I was told by Mr. Ian Paul, who's quite an authoritarian on the Hardwick fish. So I was quite chuffed with that. It was a double linear one side and a linear the other. Very hard fighting fish. Fortunately, the first fish I caught, the linear, was about 5 o'clock, 5:30 in the morning, so it was light, and Len managed to get most of the fight on camera and some good footage of the fish, so I was quite chuffed with that. It was a good start, you know, being that I'd never fished the water before, so I didn't know what to expect. You'll have to excuse me, I'm suffering as I always do with hay fever, so if I sound a bit stuffed up, that's because I am. So I was chuffed with that. Anyway, the fish the next day, uneventful, a few liners, you know, and the next morning, about 3:30 in the morning, I had another take. That turned out to be a 17-pound common, very old fish. It's not going to be one of the big ones in Hardwick, and it's not one of the big ones in Hardwick, but it was a welcome visitor anyway, you know, keeps the confidence going, you know, the bait's working. I'd like to run through what I've been doing on Hardwick. Basically, as I say, I'm fishing the far margins, and I'm not actually casting into the spots because I wanted to place them. It's a very small ledge that runs along there before it drops off fairly deep. So what I've been doing is detaching the rig and actually casting the lead over onto the far bank, walking around with halibut pellets and a little bit of sweet corn and some 10mm and 14mm complex, and actually wading into the lake till I'm up to the top of my chest waders. Actually gone over my waders 3 times. I've taken a bit of a soaking because the wind was so bad, and finding a spot about 7 foot deep. I was taking my landing net and actually putting it into the silt before it sort of dropped off on the 7 foot part, and going back to attaching my rig and literally just dropping it off and putting about 3 or 4 handfuls of halibut pellet over the top, a little bit of sweet corns, a couple of handfuls of 10mm and about 20 14mm baits. You know perfectly well that the rig's not tangled. It's bang on in the spot that you want it to, and it's worked for me. It's almost called, ambush style. I've not put a lot of bait in. I've not over baited. If the fish were really having it, I think I'd have put more boilies out, but they're not particularly. You'd have thought with the wind as it was, but they're not particularly having it. There's been a couple of the, sort of very good anglers fishing the place, and it's not been happening for them. So I thought it's not going to be the time to put a lot of bait in. I think most people get an idea of how much bait to put in, when not to put it in, and that was just what I decided to go with, and it's worked for me. So following on from the 17 common, suffering with hay fever and being up half the night, I had a little snooze about midday, and about 12 o'clock, 12:30, had a bit of a funny take, a bit of an odd, peculiar take. It wasn't a full-blown run. It's a wise old fish decided to pick up my rig, and just sort of lifting me bobbing up it went, down it came, up it went, and I thought, maybe it was a bream, so I struck into it, and 20-minute battle ensued. Very strong fish, and as I say, about 20 minutes later, 32.5 pound of beautiful scaly linear carp rolled over my net. That happened to be my 55th English 30, and what a fish to do it with. I was very, very pleased with that one. That's what I came for. I'd seen the magazine, seen the brochures, seen the pictures, and always wanted to catch one of these hardwick carp, and I managed to do it on my first trip, so I'm very pleased with that. Awesome. Hardwick Lake, give me a lot of pleasure. First trip. Can't knock that. 3 carp so far. 32.5. Just like to show you that rig. This is the rig I mainly use for most of my carp fishing. I'll show you the rig without the stringer on it. It just makes it a little bit easier. Basically, what I use is either multiplex or complex, either one, whichever suits your fancy. They're both blinding baits. If I can get this stringer off, I'm using a pop-up combined with a bottom bait, and I soak the pop-up so they don't actually hold the bottom bait up. This is a very slow sinking bait, slow sinking rig. I'm using the Gardner Subterfuge 12 pound nylon. It's knotless knotted in a different way, because you do 8 turns on the 8 turns over the hair, and then take it underneath the hair, and then do 8 turns the other side. So it actually pushes the hair out at an angle, pushing the hook up at a different angle. Basically, you thread the bottom bait on first, and then you put a pop-up on. And what this does, it makes the bait sink very, very slowly. And what happens once the bait's been in the water a while, that actually can slide. And what happens is it slides up and it sits like that, almost like a snowman, but there's a gap between the pop-up and the bottom bait. And if the carp sucks up from this way, the boilie does slide up and down very, very easy, as you can see. And the carp sucks it goes up like so, and when the carp blows it back out, it actually pushes the hook down and causes a gap. So it's a very good anti-eject rig. As I say, it's worked for me. It's very, very simple to tie. It's almost invisible on the bottom. It's just a rig I've just used for so long. It's a very lazy man's rig, if you like, but it's very, very effective. very good hook holds. It's about all I can say on that rig. So I'll just show you another couple of rigs. I mean, basically I've got the same setup, but just with a dumbbell, complex dumbbell, done in exactly the same way as the other rig. But you put it's best to put the dumbbell on lengthways, only because if you put it on the other way, it just makes it a bit more difficult for the fish to suck it into his mouth and reject it easier. You know, if he thinks there's something wrong with it, he can blow it out a lot quicker. This way, it enters the mouth a lot easier, just through the shape and the size of it. So it's very, very basic, but it catches a lot of fish. The other rig I haven't really used since I've been here, but this is a rig I come up with years and years ago. It got given the name the Withy Pool rig, which is fair enough. It was where I first used it and what I actually designed this rig for. It's a very wary carp at Withy Pool. I don't know if you can see that very well. I mean, most of you know this rig and seen it, and I have done a couple of articles on this rig. It's probably one of the best anti-eject rigs for wary carp there is on the market today. It looks very complicated. It looks a little bit it looks odd as a carp rig, but it's very, very effective. Very, very good pop-up rig, or you can use it on the bottom. I mean, I always use it as a pop-up rig normally, but I have used it with bottom baits, and it works just as well. It works on the flip and turn method. You know, it's all about the curve. I mean, as long as you keep that slight curve in there, that will turn every time. And what that does, it grips hold. As you can see, it's taken hold of my finger, which is what it's doing to the carp's mouth. As soon as he sucks that in, that pop-up is at the top by the stop. But if he blows it, you've got quite a bit of travel for anti-eject. So that gives you enough time for that to flip and turn onto the finger. And with that curve as tight as it is, it actually grips hold of the fish. So if a fish is trying to suck and blow or shake his head, that's actually gripped hold of the fish's mouth. It's a very, very effective rig. As I say, I haven't found it necessary to put it on at the moment, because I've done fairly well on my first trip at Hardwick, and I've tried to keep the baits on the bottom purely because the fish aren't really having it. And I think a pop-up on a very clear bottom is more prevalent to a carp, and he knows that there's something wrong with that compared with all the others that are laying on the bottom. One little method I just thought I'd like to show people, is a method that I find very good for confusing the fish, also very good for anti-tangles. I use this when I'm using the nylon rig with a double bait on it. It's just it's not going to sound new to any of you, but it's a stringer, just done in a slightly different way than what I've seen most people use it. I'm using sort of seven baits basically on a double bait. You'll see why in a minute. The idea behind this is you're actually surrounding the hook bait with crikey, the wind's getting up a bit. You're surrounding the hook bait with a variety of baits around it, so it makes the fish, it confuses them into testing which is the hook bait. And if you're just casting out a hook bait on its own and you've got the same amount of freebies, a slight difference in the weight of the hook or the rig or whatever it'll be makes it easier for the carp to detect which one's the hook bait. Basically what you do is you just tie the loose end of the PVA onto the hook. I normally tie it 3 times. I use the Gardner stretchy PVA. I've always used this one. It's so easy to use, and it stretches as well, if you're a little bit tight for space. And the little thing I do now is just slide the knot up near the knotless knot, and then actually hook the hook through the loop on the first boilie you've tied onto, and then you push the hook baits inside all of the inside of the circle that's left. And then what I do, which I haven't got with me now, but most of you know what dissolving foam is, put a piece of dissolving foam over the hook so it keeps the hair in place, so it doesn't, when you cast it, and the boilies stay exactly as you can see it. So you can imagine the fish coming in, it hasn't got a clue what it's come up against. It's going to try and pick up these different baits, and it won't have a clue. It won't even regulate its suck, and hopefully it will just suck up, you know, probably the majority. That we get a big fish in the area, it will suck up the majority of baits that are there. It's a method I've used for quite a few years now, probably 4 or 5 years, maybe longer than that actually, and it's done me very good. You know, I've caught a lot of big 30s on this sort of method, and a lot of other smaller fish too. So the advantage of this is once you put the foam on, if you cast into the weed, the actual weight of the whole thing, you know, it doesn't matter if you're casting into weed. It's, you know your presentation's pretty safe. Just going back a little bit, just onto one of the rigs, the Withy Pool rig. I'd just like to mention that I use this rig a lot for very, very cautious carp, and I use it a lot in the winter in conjunction with Richworth's Aero pop-ups. I use 2. I use the Squid Octopus and the Pineapple Hawaiian. They're both very, very effective. They do quite a few different flavours, Scopex and white chocolate. Probably the white chocolate would be a good winter one, but I've chose these 2. These are the ones I've stick with, and I've caught a lot of fish on them. Very, very good pop-ups. They stay popped up for 36 hours at least. You know, they are top quality pop-ups. The other thing that I do use in conjunction with those pop-ups is some of the Richworth dips. Depending on what bait I'm using, let's say I was using multiplex or complex, they do a range of dips which not only enhances your hook bait, it hardens the hook bait as well. Little tip I use if you're using these little bottles, because they are quite difficult to get the baits out of, is I tie a stringer again, but with dental floss. And if you tie the baits on, there's not many left on there, but if you tie the bottom bait on and just thread a load of them down the dental floss and then just lower them in, all you've got to do is lift the dental floss out, take one off, and Bob's your uncle, as they say. Sorry, Uncle Bob. But it's just a little tip that, you know, I don't know whether probably people have sussed that one out already, but you know, these dips are very, very good for catching on single hook baits, and if you're fishing, you know, you want to enhance your hook bait even further. That's about all I've got to say on the bait side, I think. Right, basically coming to the end of this session. I've really enjoyed my trip. First trip to Hardwick Lake. What a complex. I think it's seriously worth checking out. You know, I'll definitely be coming back again. Really enjoyed it, very well run. Some awesome looking fish, probably some of the best in the country. So I don't think you'll fail to enjoy yourselves down here. Hopefully you've enjoyed what I've had to say and enjoyed the fish that I've caught. I'll perhaps see you on the bank, be lucky, and hopefully see you soon.
Well, against all odds, Steve Renyard really showed what a class angler he is, catching a 30 from Hardwick on an exceptionally hard day. Well, as you can see, Og's finished off the meal, which just leaves us to say goodbye. And get yourself a break now, get yourself a cup of tea and some biscuits, and join my good friend Chris Ball for the second part of this superb DVD, when he'll be talking to Lee Jackson, Martin Clark, Brian Jarrett and Rocket Ron Buss. Good angling, see you soon.
Cheers.